square kilometres. So just to set that into context with some of the other projects that Anne mentioned, Pickering's about 80 kilometres squared, Hunnicutt is a similar size, and the Belford catchment, I think, is about 5 kilometres squared. So the project we've been implementing is in one of the largest pilot catchments that currently natural flood management is being developed within. The water courses, you can see through there, are differentiated into the main river, which is the light blue, and the ordinary water course. And the reason that is important is just to demonstrate to you the administrative difference. So the Environment Agency is responsible for consenting main river works, but the Leeds Local Flood Authority is responsible for the ordinary water courses. And Stroud District Council has its powers devolved from Gloucestershire County as the Leeds Local Flood Authority, and so we are responsible for managing flooding, surface water and drainage for about 80% of the Stroud Current catchment. And that picture is mirrored in almost every other catchment in the country. It just so happens that ordinary water courses are also much more likely to be suitable and appropriate places to undertake natural flood management measures in channels. How does it work? And this is where we've made it a particular focus to try and demystify some of these principles and some of the measures. There are really only three things that you can do to water to influence the rate at which it travels downstream. You can increase the roughness of your channel or your catchment by physically impeding the flow in the channel or diverting it onto rougher ground, onto the floodplain. You can attenuate it or store it, and there's lots of ways of doing that. You can choose to store it within soils, within the channel, on the floodplain, or in a host of other pockets through your catchment. The third thing you can do is to encourage infiltration. Infiltration is increased by tree planting. You can build soakaways. You can create areas of spreading. Generally, infiltration rates increase when you move away from the channel. So if you can deflect water out of channels, infiltration rates tend to pick up. And so that's a key measure. So storing, slowing, and filtering, it's identical to all the measures that you may be familiar with on development sites, building sites, sustainable urban drainage. These are the same principles, the difference being the scale at which we're implementing the activity. The other aspect of this from a technical point of view, and this really is the key message, is that unlike contemporary capital schemes where solutions are gained through a single or a couple of large activities or actions, the approach for natural flood management is a large number of interventions, all which are small, dispersed around the catchment. So in effect, you're spreading the attenuation throughout a large number of small pockets instead of creating one large storage area. You're making use of all those pockets of infiltration and you're slowing it down at every opportunity. So it really is about a large number of smaller interventions. That's one of the key take-home messages on the practical side. So let's have a look at some of the interventions that we've put in place. Now, Anne said it's not all about trees, and that's very clear, but in an area like the Stroud Valleys with a high density of woodland, then trees are one of the main mechanisms that you can use. But no, this isn't tree planting. This is using timber and trees in different ways. And all of the interventions and structures you can see here are really about slowing that flow. So they're impeding the passage of high flows, but they're allowing base flows to continue unimpeded. And you can see examples of structures here that stretch across the floodplain, and so you can make use of your floodplain by adding an impediment to flow or an obstacle onto the floodplain. And you'll have noticed that water flowing on the floodplain flows much slower than the water in the main channel, and so you can create large pockets of attenuation or storage. We've also got some examples at the bottom here of obstacles to flow in ephemeral or dry channels. These are quite numerous through the Cotswolds, these erosion gullies, numerous in upland areas too, only have water in them under periods of high flow, but very, very important to try to create obstacles to flow in areas that are ephemeral or are only active in periods of high water. These are some examples of attenuation structures. Some of them might be the same structure. So again, a lot of our structures and interventions do all three things. They slow water, they cause it to attenuate, and they encourage infiltration. So I wouldn't get too hung up on designing a particular structure to do a particular thing. We've created earth bunds in fields to spread large shallow pools across flow routes, and of course what we're doing is attenuating and encouraging infiltration. We've got silt traps and dry ponds that become engaged during times of high flows, and some of those structures you saw in the floodplain engage at high flows and will cause water to move on to the floodplain, creating quite large areas of storage. So some of our structures have 300 or 400 cubic meters of water behind them for about an hour at peak flow.
And this slide actually shows you the importance of getting out into the catchment to look at how it's working in times of heavy rainfall and high flows. Infiltration
really is the sort of the small cousin of natural flood management, but in an area like ours, which is predominantly limestone based catchment with Cotswold brash soils and clays restricted to the lower parts of the valley, then moving flows out of channel increases infiltration enormously. And it's one of the areas for further research, because in looking at some hydrographs, which we'll look at in a short while, you'll notice that water has been lost from the hydrograph, and the only assumption we can make is that we are vastly underestimating the role of infiltration in some of these temporary storage areas. What I've got here are two structures, so the top left and top right, when they've been constructed in the Slough Valley. The Slough Valley is a rapid response catchment within the Stroud Valleys, which means it's susceptible to the type of flash flooding that was experienced in Boscastle. There's 63 properties at risk of destruction in that valley, and the top two photographs show you structures as they've been freshly built. The bottom two show you what happened on March the 9th in 2016. And as Anne just said, it's really important to get out to see how your structures work during the times you want them. But this is also part of our monitoring and our evaluation of the project. So on March the 9th, we had approximately 40 millimeters of rain in the Stroud Valleys over 10 hours, resulting in the past, resulting in properties being flooded. And just as a comparison, the Pickering project on Boxing Day, which was researched by the Environment Agency, had, I think, about 20 to 25 mils over the same period of time. So this was a large event for the Stroud Valleys. Here's another structure at the top of the valley and how it was performing on March the 9th. This hydrograph, which is the only way we have of evaluating the success of what we put in place, shows you two responses in the Slough Brook. The green line shows you the response of the Slough Brook where it enters Stroud in November 2012, after about 35 to 40 millimeters of rain over 12 hours. Those of you who remember 2012 will remember it as a very wet year and ground was saturated. We also had identical antecedent conditions in March, so the ground was saturated by the storm series that had come in from Boxing Day onwards. And the blue line, you can see, is the response of the Slant Brook on March the 9th. You'll see an extremely significant difference. The peak flow entering Stroud in 2012 was just short of 1.8 metres. The peak flow on March the 9th was just under 0.4 metres. And you can see there along the left axis the alerts, so the levels at which the brook climbs and the alerts that are given to residents to warn them that flooding is likely at various places. So at 1 metre, people are advised to move out of their property. So although we can't ascribe all that difference to the work we did, the only real difference in the catchment that we can see are the 45 structures which have been built that you saw photographs of on the earlier slides. So we want to do a lot more work on this, and really this is the main way that we can evaluate the success of our work, by retrospectively looking at the response patterns to our catchments before we built our structures, and then the response under similar conditions after we've built our structures. These graphs raise a whole load of questions that people might have, but it's incredibly difficult to evaluate the success of a dispersed system, particularly where all of your structures are essentially unique and performing in a slightly different way. So what have we built and done in Stroud? Over the past 3 years, we've got about 280 of the such interventions out in the catchment. About 170 of those are what you might call large woody debris leaky downs. And so we've calculated that 21% of the Stroud Freeing catchment now discharges through our features. So that's mostly restricted to the upstream headwaters. We didn't build a couple of structures at the bottom to boost the percentage. So most of that is in the tributary areas, as Anne suggested, at the sources and at the upstream ends of those catchments. And what will all that achieve for the environment? Well, the key things we're hoping to achieve are clearly slowing down the peak flood flows that travel down the valleys. There's a huge problem with the transportation of sediment and soil. Stroud Froome, like most lowland catchments in England, has soil and sediment as its #1 pollutant, reducing habitat diversity, impacting directly on invertebrates and fish, and of course, increasing flood risk downstream, displacing water from channels. All that woody debris vastly promotes habitat diversity. Again, like most of the catchments, land managers and owners have spent the past 40 or 50 years assiduously removing all large woody debris as required by the Land Drainage Act. And we've spent the last 3 years putting that back in with all the attendant changes to stream processes, geomorphology, creating deeper water, holding back soil and silt, providing a substrate for aquatic fungi, providing a substrate for other invertebrates and plants. And we're increasing infiltration to groundwater with some small, hopeful benefits to mitigating droughts, which are a not infrequent occurrence in catchments like this, which are incredibly leaky. So our lessons really, and I haven't gone into how we have managed to build so much, that's part of another story, but the lessons learned from Stroud are effectively keep it local and community-led. We contract the building of most of those structures to the farmers and the landowners themselves, supervised by myself. Build capacity in those local landowners and local contractors and volunteer groups. It doesn't need to be complicated with big consultancies producing models and producing catchment-wide plans, you can start small and build out by finding some landowners, some residents who are happy to work with you and just getting going. So our mantra is build small and many rather than few and large. Start as upstream as you possibly can. In a catchment like the Stroud Froome, that means starting above the point of permanent base flow on the top. Don't wait for perfect data before building. There's no such thing in any case, but we focused on low risk, certain wins in places where we knew we had willing landowners and good support from the community. That gains you confidence, which is important if you want to continue your project to actually start working in other areas where you may have less landowner support. And don't focus on volumes, heights and measurements. Those things are largely irrelevant for the first few years of your project. So what we've put here are a few of the sources of information where you can find out more. So there's the EA Water Retention Measures Guidance. There's a Natural Flood Management Handbook produced by SEPA. The Environment Agency have the Working with Natural Processes guidance, and the River Restoration Centre contains guidance on a lot of the practical implementation interventions that you need for both river restoration and natural flood management. And we've produced a couple of films, one which gives you an overview of the project in Stroud, and another which is a slightly more technical film that looks at how we built our interventions and what we hope they will do.
Just to say that the Met Office is predicting that severe weather events are going to be something like 7 times more likely to happen. So we have to look for natural flood management measures to help extend the life of even our conventional defences. And the natural flood management measures are no regrets options. They can often bring social, economic and environmental benefits. They're often cheaper, you know, and basically there's all sorts of benefits from doing the right thing in the right place. It's about taking a more integrated approach to the way we manage our land and water, restoring and maintaining our natural capital assets to reduce future costs to society through natural ecosystem processes. But you need to consider these sorts of measures from the outset in new flood defence schemes and agri-environment agreements. And we also need to be gathering evidence to support the improvement of our data to feed into mapping and tools that will support more projects and give engineers more confidence in the fact that this approach actually does work.
We've got some questions that have come through, so I'm not sure if Karen, the organiser, has managed to log on, but we can take some of these questions live if that's what people would like to do, and we'll just work through some of them and answer as best we can for now. So we can share the URL for the report. I'm pretty sure that the organiser will be able to send through all the URLs to all the people who were listening today. How do these measures affect forestry operations? Very wet, boggy soil. Did foresters express any concern? The answer to that is yes, some foresters. We've worked with a number of woodland, commercial woodland operators. What we always try and do is aim measures into places that are not the most important areas for production. But one of the other things we also do, one of the other main interventions we have in forestry areas is moving water from tracks onto the woodland floor. This has been one of our really successful interventions because the woodland owners can immediately see the benefits in terms of reduced erosion, reduced maintenance costs, the disbenefit, if you like, of moving all that water onto the woodland floor is very much lower to them than the immediate concerns about water erosion on tracks. It also links to a question further down, which is about how long the water hangs around. The answer is that it's an exceedingly short period of time. We're talking in hours rather than days for the in-channel works, because the peak flows in the catchment like Stroud are only occurring for a couple of hours. On some of the field bunds, the water does hang around for a few days and then steadily infiltrates away and dries out. And the latest figures we had on infiltration and retention was that some of our field bunds were drying out within 4 days of being completely full. Hang on, there's Simon Hooton. Can you give a rough idea? Okay, that was that one. We can share the links in the...
Get a copy. I think you will all get a copy of the slides, actually. I'm pretty sure you will, but we'll make sure you do.
Okay, Sarah Ross is asking what type of monitoring is being undertaken in Stroud. I have to confess the answer is very little monitoring is taking place in Stroud. Our philosophy was that whilst it would have been great to have undertaken good baseline monitoring before the project got started, the reality is very few research institutes or academics would be interested in a drainage officer from a district council promising that they would have lots of good things to measure in a few years. So our philosophy was to get on and build and create a rich research environment for others to come in and undertake research and monitoring. And we are one of the catchment case studies that a number of people are looking to use in the NERC, Natural Flood Management research round, which is currently ongoing. And we've made monitoring and research one of our priorities over the next 3 years. So we will be doing some work, but as yet we've undertaken very little apart from the retrospective gauge analysis that you can see.
Laura is asking a question about how you decide where to build structures, and certainly the Environment Agency's R&D, the research framework, the evidence directory and opportunity mapping will help people with that. But Chris, can you talk about what you did and how you took on board the presence of any protected species? Yeah, we've worked in a number of areas with white-clawed crayfish, and a couple of our projects have actually been designed to provide beneficial habitat for white-clawed crayfish in the shape of large woody debris. We've always put in place pre-works monitoring to look at the population, and clearly when we're building, we try to avoid killing any particular individuals, but you know, when you're moving large pieces of timber around in the stream, then that can't always be guaranteed. All of the works we've undertaken in these areas are done under license with the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, and as I said, they are particularly designed to scour deeper pockets of water to provide additional habitat for white claws. We've had a number of other surveys done, particularly on tree felling side for protected bat species. So it's part of our consenting process, really, like any other forestry or woodland management or in-channel operation. So Kirsty is asking about how long we would expect woody dams to last. Now, if you build them right and you use big materials, so you fell a whole tree, for example, they become self-perpetuating, and these sort of structures are much more sustainable in the long run, because you don't really want to be going back to each and every one and rebuilding them. So if you use small material, you're much more likely to have to do that. How do you cope with that, Chris?
Yeah, no, Anne's right. So we use large material as the main source main pieces of wood in any of our dams. Not always possible, of course. It also depends upon the species of wood you're using. We avoid using softwoods wherever possible, but clearly we've worked in some areas with conifer plantations, so that's not possible. Conversely, to what you might think, building our structures in a natural, leaky way means that they last longer, because those high waters tend to move through the structures much easier than if you build a uniform structure made out of, say, telegraph poles or fencing posts. So using big timbers, tree trunks, we pin them in place. We know we will have to rebuild, and what we are aiming to do is to try to link with, particularly in the woodlands, with a natural management cycle of thinning or coppicing, so that the additional cost of producing large woody debris dams are in effect a marginal cost on ongoing management of woodland works. So whilst you've got the people and the machines in place, it's a very little additional cost to build some structures on top of the management you're already undertaking. We don't maintain our structures in any sense. Once they're in, they will rot and become part of the natural system. And indeed, that's one of our management aims, that we change some of the morphology and the hydromorphology of these systems to reflect a much more natural system, when, of course, they would have had large quantities of woody debris before people started removing it or managing the banks.
Okay, so Charlotte is asking a question about the fact that the majority of these sorts of measures will be on privately owned land. And how do we go about that, persuading owners to allow natural flood management measures to be created on the land and give it up? And will stewardship or higher level stewardship help with implementing such measures? And the thing to really point out there is that all the work that Chris has done, for example, has been working with the landowners and getting them on board, getting their buy-in. And he found that, and we at the Environment Agency found in other parts of the world, that the landowners are quite keen to be known as flooding heroes. Certainly up in the Pickering scheme and down in Holneycutt, people have actually become quite proud of the fact that by allowing these things to happen on their land, they are helping to save the communities downstream from flooding. And certainly as we move into looking at agricultural support schemes, new agricultural support schemes, once we've left Europe, we'll be looking to make sure that there are measures in there that can help to incentivize landowners to allow their land to be flooded more regularly.
I'll just add to that we, as Andrew said, we don't directly compensate any of our landowners, and I think the debate has become confused slightly between landowners undertaking works with someone like myself on a small way or small water courses, where the level of impact to the business is either insignificant or minor, and therefore compensation payments are probably not appropriate. None of our farmers have asked for any compensation or payments over and above actually being paid to do the works, to provide the materials and undertake the labour. That said, once you move further downstream onto large areas of floodplain, where you may be asking farmers and landowners to have large amounts of water for longer periods, I think that's where compensation and measures may come in, and sticking between the teeth.
I don't like the C word. I'd much rather see it as a positive incentive for positive measures. Compensation is a very difficult thing, and I don't think we should be going there, but we should be trying to work with the landowner to have a more pragmatic use of their land, for example, floodplain.
Can I just add that to date, the countryside stewardship and HLS schemes have provided no support for any of the projects that we've done.
No regrets underplayed. Yes,
yes.
I agree with you. We need to be emphasising those aspects of the measures, the fact that they bring so many other benefits.
Charlotte, again, an indication of maintenance frequency. None for large woody debris. Some of the earth bank structures in fields may need repairing if they get damaged by cattle. But really, you know, we should be designing this sort of stuff so it becomes part of the landscape rather than something that's artificially imposed that we have to go on doing again and again and again.
Alison has asked a question about the Environment Agency and flooding a nature reserve and to do with the Thames carrying sewage. That all is being addressed actually with things like the Thames Tideway, the new sewer scheme. So hopefully that will be reduced. Okay. Okay. So we've covered incentives. We're hoping that there will be, under the new agricultural support schemes, measures will be funded under that. We'll certainly be pushing for that to be a component of the new scheme. Okay, I should again ask about cost benefits. In Stroud, we haven't undertaken any cost benefit assessment because it's very difficult, as we said, to ascribe benefits to any particular structure. That said, something that we can ask the organisers to circulate, we've produced case studies for 6 of our sites and projects, which includes costings, and it won't surprise you to find that the costs associated with building large numbers of small structures are very minor compared to costs associated with larger schemes. So really, the benefits are there to be measured and for the taking. As I said earlier, some of these costs can also be marginal on top of existing management works. So you really can build some of this stuff very cheaply. It is a no-brainer, certainly, and part of my role is to convince others to undertake it by describing just how straightforward it is and to demystify some of it. Jacqueline Barnes raises the synchronicity question. We haven't looked at the synchronicity question because it's extremely complicated. And I think anyone who tells you they can model a measure where you should be putting measures in one tributary as opposed to another is probably expanding on their knowledge somewhat. It's incredibly difficult to decide to sacrifice one set of residents in one tributary in order to try and pretend that you can create some certainty around this synchronization issue. So in Stroud, we have multiple flood receptors. We have receptors on all of the tributaries. We have receptors where they meet at the confluence in town, and we have people who become flooded further downstream. So we take action throughout that whole system to reduce flood risk to the residents downstream of our actions. So Simon's asking, there was a big backlash after the Somerset floods, and I'm well aware of that. It was all about we should be maintaining the watercourses, we should be dredging them. I think probably there hasn't been any backlash in Stroud.
There's been no backlash at all. We've had incredible support from our flood action groups. We've got 5 flood action groups in the area. They were actually instrumental in making sure that the funding from the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee was committed to this type of approach. There is a degree of understanding amongst the people who've been flooded throughout the catchment that if one area of the catchment takes measures to speed the flow, then they are actually increasing flood risk to those downstream. So it was all credit to our flood groups that they decided to work together across the whole catchment to create a system that would provide benefits to them all, rather than just benefit those who were able to undertake some clearance works within their own small portion of the catchment.
But I think it's really, really important that ecologists keep pointing out that dredging rivers is not the answer. We need to keep the soil out of the rivers and on the land where we need it for productive agriculture. And if you explain the questions of scale to people, it would be like trying to drain an Olympic swimming pool through a straw. You know, a river is such a small part of a catchment. It's such a tiny conduit that you cannot get rid of all that water just by dredging the river channel. So we must keep being robust.
Okay, Colin Bonfield asks if you installed silk curtains along with your log barriers. The answer, well, if I've understood the question, no, we have no silk curtains with our woody debris dams. We have used some silk fences in other areas, but not in the streams. What species of trees are we selecting? We select the species of tree that is closest to us on the stream side. So in many cases that's alder, we've used ash, we've used beech, we've used a whole series of hardwoods, and as I said earlier on one of our projects, we used softwood because that was the main plantation within the catchment. Okay, there's some of Sarah Ross is asking how we engage the local community and landowners. I think I'll just point you to our website and our film for that, Sarah, and you can see some of the local community and the landowners describing their role in the project, why they support it and what they've done. Okay, and we'll go to, I think we've answered Megan's there about difficulties in, watch the technical film and you'll see how we manoeuvre wood around. Bruce, natural infrastructure schemes suggest there can be a catchment scale market for avoiding costs in slowing the flow of water. This would involve landowners, land managers and buyers of reduced flood risk. Can you please comment on the feasibility of this in the Stroud District Council area based on your experience? I've seen the proposals, Bruce, and they're very complicated, is my response. My role as a project officer in developing, designing and supporting landowners to develop and design their own schemes, I think has been crucial in accelerating the implementation and uptake. Whilst landowners I've come across are very keen to help, very, very few of them would have been so keen that they would have decided to have delivered this project on their own. I deal with some farmers and landowners who don't use email, don't have mobile phones still, and so developing a farmer-led business case that I think is described in there would be a very complicated way of going about this project. Having a project officer like myself, which is entirely feasible in most local authorities, with a job title of Natural Flood Manager, Rural Sustainable Drainage Manager, could do more for progressing the uptake of natural flood management than having complex natural capital schemes in place, is my view.
Julie Batty has asked, how are the measures being viewed by anglers? Has it been difficult to win hearts and minds? And Chris, I think the work that you've done, you've got trout quite high up in those little.
Yeah, no, we've had no complaints from anglers. If you look at the photographs of those structures that we've built under high flow conditions, you'll see that they're all eminently migratable by fish. We don't have, unfortunately, salmon and sea trout in our catchment. We've got eels and lampreys. We found both eel and lamprey and brown trout within, around and upstream of all of our structures. and we deliberately build them so that they can be fully accessible to all the species that we know are in our system.
Okay, Gillian McCoy is asking about flood risk and insurance companies requiring a clear level of protection, and the difficulty of the fact that natural flood management, you can't actually say what level of protection you might be able to give those at risk downstream. Has Chris come across how these issues could be accommodated in the future?
We have endless discussions, Gillian, with our residents about how this will affect insurance. The simple answer is that it doesn't affect it at all, because, as you say, it's very difficult to quantify the reduction in risk. Now, we have shown reduction in risk, and the residents in our flood groups are largely happy that there is less chance of them being flooded than there used to be. They would like their premiums to be reduced, but it's not something that the district council can enter into a discussion with multiple insurance companies or even the association of insurers. I think it's just something we'll have to learn to live with and develop over time as natural flood management measures become more commonplace. And I think my view is it's down to the insurance industry to start to look at where these schemes are in place, how they accommodate them within their assessment of risk for particular postcodes or particular catchments.
Okay, Colin Bonfield is asking, where there are no trees, is there a place for using artificial materials? And certainly, Colin, looking at things like upland restoration and grip blocking, things like recycled plastic have been used quite a bit. You're talking about green ply, but I think if you don't have trees within a catchment, you wouldn't be looking to engineer large woody debris dams. So you'd be looking at other measures where there are no trees, but certainly the use of recycled plastic is definitely used up on in the uplands. Talk about when you secure the woody debris.
Oh,
so,
yeah. So
Caradwyn
Atkins is asking about securing woody debris in place. Yes, we do secure woody debris in some circumstances. We use reinforcing steel bars, 20 mils, 1.2 meters long, with a washer welded onto the top. And you can see the process on our film, Caradwyn. And in some cases, though, we haven't secured, and that's where we're working in tributaries or subcatchments or streams where we know that material won't move a great deal. There's a worker, a guy called Simon Dixon, who may well be listening into the webinar, who's worked on the movement and the likelihood of transportation of woody material through catchments in woodlands at high flows. And we use the general principles that he has come out with. We always leave our long woody material large, so 2 times or 2.5 times the channel width. We create complex structures, so the pinning is there not only to fix it to the ground, but to create this structure which is very complicated and unlikely to move. And clearly, if we're making the structures within woodland, anything that we place there has a high degree of likelihood that it will get hung up on a tree or trees further downstream if it moves. So the answer is yes, we do stake. We've also used chestnut stakes. We've used systems where we dig the banks a little and place the tree trunks within the banks. So there's a variety of things there that you can see in our technical film.
So Chris is asking, in Stroud, have you brought any community leaders or difficult stakeholders to see flood attenuation in action? And that would definitely be one thing that I would do, would be to get people who don't like such schemes out on site, because it is a very useful way to educate them and disseminate the benefits. But Chris, perhaps.
Yeah, we've had hundreds of people out on site. We've had lots of our local councillors. I go and talk to parish councils. We've had other farmers, the landowners visiting other farmers and other sites. We've had flood defence engineers. We've had forestry operatives. So we've had a lot of people who might be described as skeptics to this approach out to look. I don't know if we've converted them all or convinced them, but our policy is that anyone is welcome to come and look at the sites and to talk to some of the landowners that we've worked with, and it is a good way to educate and disseminate. And
so if any of you are perhaps ecologists working with a local authority and you think you'd like to bring your drainage engineers up, that is an important part of your role, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just to show people around.
Yeah,
or,
just get in touch with me through the Stroud District Council website.
Yeah, that would include people who work for consultancies, perhaps, who work with flood risk engineers. You know, that's an important part of what Chris does. So I suggest we just take one more question.
Well, let's just take the beavers one.
The beavers.
When will we introduce beavers in Stroud? When someone brings some beavers to Stroud, you might find them there. There is a proposal for an introduction, an enclosed introduction within the Forest of Dean by the Forestry Commission. If you look in some of the local papers in the Forest of Dean, you'll see a description there. Colin's asking if we've slowed down the deterioration of road surfaces in Stroud. They're still as bad as they always were, Colin. But we do some of our measures do divert flows from some of the smaller roads, and there's a huge potential further part of the project, or in all places, all geographical locations. The roads in steep areas are huge conduits for mucky, silt-laden flows reaching our watercourses, and diverting some of those flows out of off the road into fields or into woodlands is a really productive thing to do. It reduces peak flows and can mitigate the entrance of some of those pollutants. So we would like to, but it's not something that we've done a great deal of, just because I'm working largely on my own on the project.
So I'm sorry if we didn't get round to answering all your questions. If you have any specific questions that you want Chris and I to answer, perhaps you could send them in to Karen. But we need to hand over to Karen now, because she wanted to raise a few things with, well, I hope she's there, with the members. So do you want to stop sharing?
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you very much for your attention, everybody.